Good morning, everybody. Dan Ortolani here for this edition of our expert hour office hours. Shay, did you want to kick off with a few comments?
Sure, yeah. Thanks, Dan. Welcome, everyone. So good to see a lot of familiar names on the line. As Dan said, this is our second installment of our IBI Expert Office Hours. So glad that you guys are joining us again this month. Just a few housekeeping real quick before we dive in. This session is being recorded. So you will receive a copy of the recording after the session is complete, as well as any content or material that is shared, especially from Patrick's content that he's going to show today. So I will send all of that to you guys in a follow-up email. And if you guys were with us last time in November for that one, just as a reminder, the Q&A session at the end, we really encourage you guys to, come off mute. We're going to let you guys ask your questions out loud, converse with us. So when we get to the Q&A part, don't be shy. Feel free to submit your questions or ask them out loud. We'd love to talk with you. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Dan, and we'll get started on this month's Expert Office Hours.
Thank you, Shay, and again, good morning again to everybody. It's great to see everyone on the call today. I'd just like to kick it off by saying, we're so excited that our WebFOCUS 933 release will be available really by the end of this week. We're confident we'll have it posted for you. And this is, the next iteration, the latest iteration of our long-term support release. And as we committed to you, we are providing support for these 9.3x versions for 5 years, meaning that we will add incremental new capabilities as well as product defect fixes, security fixes, all that maintenance that's so important to you, going forward. One of the things I'd like to highlight about 933 is that we have significantly enhanced our data science and machine learning capabilities in that release, really across 3 areas. One is the predictive analytics, and the way that we're implementing the predictive capabilities are effectively these capabilities, these algorithms can be called directly from your WebFOCUS applications. Essentially as a compute where you embed that subroutine and which calls a Python program directly from your WebFOCUS application. So it's pretty easy to integrate the new predictive capabilities directly from within your existing WebFOCUS systems. Secondly, our instant insights capabilities, which just through by the entering in of a couple of parameters, we can generate literally multiple reports, dashboards, analytics that automatically get generated, and that you could pull those results, resulting analytics and charts into your designer environment or into your WebFOCUS applications. And then finally, natural language query. Many of you have been really waiting for this to become a viable offering so that you can embed natural language query, for example, in your customer-facing, your external-facing applications very easily. We've integrated a new large language model, very intelligent model, that can essentially take the natural language queries, we convert them into SQL, send them to the server, and bring those results back to you. And very powerful now and production ready. So we definitely encourage you to try out these new capabilities and adopt this new release. And then going forward, 934, we're excited that we'll be adding some new designer capabilities as well to continue our commitment to you with this long-term support release. And then along these same lines that I want to remind everybody, we have an upgrade program that we're partnering with Amtex, our strategic professional services partner, and you can take advantage of that program for both the assessing of your upgrade efforts as well as potentially enlisting Amtex to help you with an actual upgrade engagement. So on that note, again, I welcome everybody. Excited to see everybody here on the call, and I'll turn it over to Patrick now for today's technical topics, and we'll be around for Q&A later today. Thank you.
Hi, and thank you for your time today. So, my plan today is to get you a little deeper look into the capabilities in WebFocus to handle and deal with variables because I'm with WebFocus for quite some time. So, I did a lot of development over time and I was doing a lot of work. And I think having variables in WebFocus is one of the most powerful capabilities in the product because it really allows you to do a lot of interactivity, building scripts, and therefore reducing the amount of things you need to do. So my plan for today is I prepared a few slides, but mainly the slides are meant to be shared for you. So in case you like some of the scripts, we're gonna share the slides with you, so you're gonna be able to copy and paste sample code that I'm using in my session with you. So to keep it simple, we're going to go through a few topics like declaring variables, manipulating and using variables. So, but let's jump right into the software. So I'm using I created a bunch of samples in here. I'm going to share the change management package with you as well. So in case you're on 9.3, you can use my code and just import my change management package. But at the end, looking at my variables, let me go through a sample. So I created a little sample in here. Let me zoom in a little bit. So on the basic syntax. So I guess many of you might know the basic syntax to deal with web focus, but variables. But I prepared a few samples to get you a short impression and some of my most favorite type of variables that I'm usually using whenever I create content in web focus. So declaring variables, as you know, the basic thing is using -z to declare a variable. So you can use that one, build your variable, assign a fixed text. You can use a variable and add another variable as content into the variable. But not all of you might know that you can also use most of the web focus function syntax to build complex calculations whenever you declare a variable. So historically, a lot of people might use the good old edit functionality, which is a nice feature to get values from a date field, for example. So in here, I'm pulling my date in the format DMYY, and I'm adding some dots here. I'm adding something to the timeline. So nice and basic functionality, but very often you want to do more complex things. Like you might want to go current date minus 3 months, or you might want to go current date minus 12 month, which gonna require you a little bit more complexity. And as you see, those variables can be quite complex. So there's multiple functions that are actually uh, sitting on top of each other. Reason for that one is actually because to be able to really calculate with a date, you always have to make sure if you deal with variables that you use something like the date convert function, which is in here, because date convert is going to turn a string into a date. And that's going to be crucial to be able then to use another capability like date add on top of that date. And then at the end, I'm converting it back into another date format to make sure it can be used in a date. So let me run that one quickly. So I think it's going to be easier to see what we're building in here. So at the end, what was created in here is actually, of course, those are quite simple. But for that one, that's my today date, which is just a simple text. But I'm also using those variables in here to build something like the current date minus 3 month, the current date minus 12 month. And I'm also turning them into something that is a more human readable format so I can use those variables in the within WebFocus. So straightforward and simple. Whenever you want to deal with variable, you got a lot of flexibility in here. Just keep in mind, you can use functions in here, but some functions might require you to convert formats first because by default, variables that you use, like this one in here, they don't have a format. So you might have to use a function to make sure that variable gets to a format so it can be used as a parameter into the surrounding functionality in here. And that's why I'm building those type of variables in here to be able to build what I need. Again, Little debugging tip, many of you might know, if you use dash type, you're going to be able to see the output of your variable. So if I run that one, we're going to see the proper output. But for debugging, it might be also a good idea to go to the set ampersand echo all and get to that information in here. So you're going to be able to see more detailed debug code. Let me zoom a little bit out here so we get more detailed debug code. By the way, whenever you use in here, you might want to use right click because that allows you to comment or uncomment full blocks of your code in here. So again, basic simple code. I'm not going to go too deep in here. I'm pretty sure all of you know those type of capabilities, and I'm going to share my samples here so you're going to be able to use it. As I already mentioned before, there's something important about variables. I already mentioned variables don't really have a format. You already saw it might be important if you're dealing with a date, but it's also important if you're dealing with a numeric element. So if you go to my DM precision, DM precision is your friend. So in here, so if I'm running or if I'm looking at that one, you see I've got a variable one, variable two, and I'm doing some calculations, some division on here. So if I divide 3,333 by 1,000, what are you expecting in here? If you run it, you're gonna see the result is 3. That's because by default, numeric or integer values in here, or actually the variables are handled as integers. But there's one important thing. You can use DM precision as a setting. By default, DM precision is set to off. So I can set it to a different value, which means DM precision is now turned to 6, which means the variables are gonna respect up to 6 digits after the after the separator in here. So I'm now getting the correct result. So be careful whenever you deal with variables and you do some mathematical calculations. You want to make sure that your DM precision is set up properly so you're going to be able to really deal with those values as expected. Important, take a look, use it. Another one that we were looking at, just putting it into the script so you got it. So you can also use the read syntax to populate values in WebFOCUS. So if you never use that one, read allows you to read values from a first table file statement and put those values into the follow-up statement. So if we go back to my portal in here, so where's my reading variables in here? So let's open that one up, run it. So if we read that one, we populating those values from the result set of my little table file statement. Again, one thing that's important, type helps you to see the values, but before you deploy effects, always remove your type statements or just comment them, because sometimes that might be leaving them in might be a security issue, or it might be even causing some tools like Designer to complain about those code snippets, those code leftover type of capabilities. So clean up your echo, clean up your types whenever you want to deal with variables, because that's going to make your life here way easier and less risk dealing with those elements. Again, of course, you can use repeat in here, build a loop, read multiple values, but I'm going to keep it short, just having you the technology, because I want to go into more advanced variable capabilities. Prompting is a quite nice functionality, and not sure if you ever looked into the most recent additions to prompting, because over time, there were a lot of changes respecting the new or quoting the new prompting capabilities in WebFOCUS. So if we go for the prompting sample in here, you see there's a bunch of very basic prompting samples. So if you just use a simple prompt, The only thing you get is an edit field. But you can also use WebFocus auto prompting and prompting syntax to build more complex syntax. So that first one in here, that from to is a generic from to create a slider. My second one, my country in here, is a more complex prompt that tells WebFocus, hey, I want a prompt for the country, but I want to create a drop-down box with multiple selections, and the content of that box should be read from a certain master field. It's in a certain field. The comparison operator is supposed to be equal. It should be sorted ascending, and that's the field it's pulling the information from. So let me run it quickly. So in here, let me get a little bit bigger window here. So you see, we got our found_num value, which is ending up in a slider that can be slide from the minimum to maximum value. I got my country, which I click on it, got a list of all the available countries sorted in here. And if I select England, you saw car is refreshing, which means it was changing the values of that car field. Why is it doing that one? Simply because I'm using car here with the similar syntax. So it's a multi-select field. It's reading the field car from my master file var car. It's a format, it's a comparator operator, it's an ascending field. That's the field name. But additionally, I added that within country, which refers to the variable country in my first prompt here. So that country in here, amper country, is used within the within, which results in that second parameter to be automatically changed with the first one. So just simple prompting logic gets you a lot of capability for variables to deal with the content of those fields. Same is true, of course, for that format thing. So I can create a static list of elements that are in that format field that are going to be selectable as a dynamic, as a static list. And again, that syntax is not just good for auto prompting. So I can also go back to my hub here. I can add a designer visualization. So I'm going to start with a very simple designer page in here. Start with some content in here. And just simply go to my prompting thing here and drag it and drop it in here. And you see, designer has some parameters that are required, and it's adding all those parameters to that list. And if I add them to the page, designer is also respecting all those definitions for my facts. So even if you're hand coding your facts, you can still use your hand coded logic with proper prompting syntax to make sure those elements are populating controls within my designer environment. So very useful to build prompting logic. Of course, it's a little bit work to build your prompt. Let me go back to it. But whenever you properly define your variables in the prompt dialog, it's going to be quite useful to build it. I also included a link to the manual in here that gets you some information on how that prompting logic is supposed to work. So again, that's going to be in your document as well. So you're going to have the information on how to build prompting, what type of syntax is supported in prompting, but quite powerful whenever you do it. And as you see, it doesn't need to have a table file or a where statement. You can have that prompting logic everywhere in your WebFocus code where you deal with a variable, no matter where that variable resides. It's not related to prompt for filtering. But there's more. So very useful whenever you build variables. I very often tend to forget what I did or what other people's did. So there's some quite useful functionality in WebFocus as well to show you variables. So in case you want to see what variables are existing at the moment, you could also go for that information and read the information. So let me go for those commands here. Let's start with the dash prompt here, the dash question mark ampersand. So we can go in here. Let me go put this document in here. So actually, let's start a new one. So simplest one is dash question mark space ampersand. That gets me a list of all variables defined on the system. So in here, you're going to see there's a few variables with amper, and there's a few variables with a simple amper. I'm going to look into why those different variables exist in a few minutes, but that's a list of all the variables currently defined in the system. You could also extend that syntax a little bit. So if you want to go for amper, I can change that one. So if we go back over here, so if I change that one to be amper only, we're going to see amper variables only. So those are the amper variables currently active in WebFOCUS. You could also go to something if you know something about the name. You know it's something with date. You could also use the name of a specific variable if you want to go for the name of for the content of a specific variable. So if we run that one, we see all variables starting with date, and those are the date variables currently active on my system, so I know how they are defined. So easy way to figure out how they are defined, but sometimes you might also want to know why are they defined as they are defined. And that's why you use the save print feature. So save print is a quite nice capability. If you put that one in here, you're not just getting the variables. We need to zoom a little bit in here. But in here you see, and let me make it bigger. So you see not just the variables with their value, you also see in here more details on those variables. So you get some information on the set command. So it's a little bit more detailed overview on some of the variables. So you can read a little bit more on those variables. So a straightforward way. So using that syntax, that dash question mark, whatever, is a useful functionality to figure out what your variable is currently defined as. So, okay, what else do I have? One important thing I learned on the hard way is eval is your friend. So if you're dealing with variables, you want to know about eval. So what does it do? Let's see why it's important. So looking at that information in here, so if I'm using my variable in this way, so I'm using my set amper test and I'm putting the date into that variable and I run it, you see the content is amper dmyy now. Why is that? That's because the parser in WebFOCUS finds that variable here to between those two tick marks in here, and it interprets it as a text. So it's keeping the text in here. But using eval, I'm forcing WebFOCUS to just replace the variable in here with the content of the variable before it's continuing to work. So .eval is a nice and very often important technique to make sure the content of a variable is replaced, or the variable is replaced by its content before WebFOCUS is processing that content. Because now you see it's now showing the date information in here and not just the variable and the amper thing. So quite important whenever you deal with variables, you might want to consider using eval in your variable to make sure variable is replaced with its content in here. So what else do we have on our little list? And again, remember your questions. I'm going to be there to answer a few questions. So very important one. Now we're going in the complex logic in here. You might never found it, but WebFOCUS has a nice file, which is the site WFS file that allows you to declare variables as well. So why are you using it? There's a few different scenarios. Number A, let me go into the live session. and we move over to my site VFS file, that site WFS. So you're going to find it in the administration console, and there you're going to find it in your custom settings, which is your site WFS. Site WFS is a profile to manage, for example, parameters. One of the things that I'm doing in here, this syntax here is exposing some variables that exist in WebFocus. So WebFocus has something like URL protocol, server name, server port, language, IBIMR user, IBIMR domain, web app, full path, full fax name, MR item handle. Those variables already exist in WebFocus, but you cannot use them in procedures unless you make sure they are passed. Again, make sure whenever you pass something, make sure it's not critical. It's not security relevant. You're not exposing anything that you don't want to expose, but you can control if you want to expose it. So if we go back to my script in here, so let's go back to my script, and we're going to go for my site WFS magic in here. Open that one up. So in here, you're going to see in here, I'm typing all those variables in here that you saw on the system. Let me actually hide those and run those. So you're going to get a lot of useful information like, hey, that's the currently logged in user. That's the domain, which is the folder in WebFocus, in the WebFocus hub here. That's the WebFocus magic with variable thing in here. I'm getting the domain name in here. I can also get information in here. Let me run it again. So I can also get information like the name of my WebFocus server. So nice one, if you're running the same fax on multiple servers, you can use that information to determine the server. You have the port. You have something like the language. You have something like the name of your header server. You have something in here like your path, the full path where that fax is created, or the name of the fax, which doesn't get me a result now because I'm running it in ad hoc mode and not the saved fax. So very easy to run those. So let me actually save that site WFS magic. And let me run it from in here. So there's the site WFS magic, and let's run it from here in a new window. So now you see, you're going to see in here, you see the name of that fax that we're currently dealing, which is the descriptive text, the name, as well as the technical information on that element. So quite nice to get those technical information from WebFocus without having the need to do different code. So very nice, for example, if you want to make a decision or a toggle or whatever, depending on the server you're running your content on. But site WFS can do way more. There's a few things that allow you to copy values from the session or the HTTP header or your cookie or your session. What does it mean? Actually, moving over back to WebFocus, and I'm gonna enable this information in here, and I'm going to hide this information in here. So let's run it again. So now I'm pulling information that is not part of WebFocus. Let's make it bigger again. So now you see you're pulling the host. I'm also pulling the information which browser my user is using. I'm also pulling my session ID. I'm pulling information on, is that server a local server or is it a server that runs remote? How do I get to this information? Straightforward, site WFS is my friend. And what do I mean by site WFS is my friend? I can use that syntax in here to copy information like the user agent from my HTTP header. So I'm copying the user agent from the HTTP header, and I'm putting that one into a WebFocus variable called WFS user agent, and I'm passing that variable. I'm also reading the WebFocus host, which is the host name of the WebFocus server. And then I'm doing some logic here. So I'm checking if that URL like here, webfocus.local contains local. I'm using local server. else I'm using remote server as the content of the new variable. So you can pull that information from outside WebFocus. Outside WebFocus actually means if I go to diagnostics and I go to my HTTP request information, that's what you can see. That's information that's created by your application server, by Tomcat. It's not WebFocus information. But if I have something in the HTTP header, I can take it out of the HTTP header using that syntax and transform it into a WebFocus variable. Same is true for my cookie. So I can copy information from my cookie, from my WebFocus cookie, and put it into a WebFocus variable. Same way around, I can also copy information from a WebFocus variable into the session. So quite nice if you want to do some more and find some more about your user and the login and the details and the browser. That syntax allows you to transform information into a WebFocus variable. Again, I added the manual in here in case you want to look up some of that content. A little bit more, I put in the sample code in here, so if you want to steal it, feel free. If you want to play around with it, I put in the information in here. One more thing that I learned about variables. I see a lot of people putting variables into the profiles, like Edda as prof, a user profile. I prefer, instead of using them, I prefer to go to the universal profile. The universal profile sits on the WebFocus reporting server. So if you go to the administration console, you go to configuration, and you go to your settings. So it's a client settings. In here is your universal profile. Universal profile can be used to include WebFocus code. In my sample here, I'm including this fax. Universal profile is executed whenever WebFocus client or WebFocus report caster run any WebFocus report. So remember, I built those variables with date and time, and I like them. I want to use them everywhere. I want to make them available for each and any WebFocus report. So I'm putting that one into the universal profile, and I can now run those variables and use them in any type of report. So whenever I go to my code here, so let's go for this one here, added that one. So whenever I do anything, I can also tell the system, hey, type amper heute, which is the variable for today. So that one sits in my universal profile, and you see that one is available in each and any WebFocus report without having to define it again and again. So universal profile is usually a very good way to put variables that you want to make reusable. So that one is executed anytime WebFocus is running a report. Nice capability. Wasn't available in the past. It was added a few years back, and it's very useful to define variables. I added my default universal profile because you see I also added a few things like some set commands to improve the graphic quality for charts in PowerPoint. I added a feature, or I added a setting here for the empty report. So you can use that profile for whatever you want to use a profile for, better than putting things into Edda as prof. By the way, if you still want to put elements in Edda as prof, you can, but there's some limitation. We're running short in time, but I also have the capability of dealing with variables in master files. So in the meantime, WebFocus also allows you to declare variables in the master files. So whenever we do something, let me go over to my WebFocus content in here. So I got my information in here somewhere, magic with variables. So I built a little version of here of my car profile. So that's a derived version of car. And besides declaring variables in profiles, you can also declare variables within the master file itself. So actually in here, I have a defined field or actually I have two defined fields. And in here, I've got one which is today, which is actually creating a new column with the today date. And I got a second one that contains the username. And whenever I want to use a variable in a define, so that's a simple define in here that actually uses a variable called username to put in the username of WebFocus. To be able to use variables in a master file, I have to do two steps. I have to declare the variable in the master file. I have to populate that variable. So in here, I got a profile that populates the variable. So if I go to properties, you see I got a profile in here that populates that variable. So let's go to that one very quickly. So in here, I'm defining that variable username. And that's how I can get a variable easily into a master file. So use a master file profile to change or fill the variable, but make sure you declare the variable in the master file because otherwise it's not going to be there. Actually, I got you a little bit more advanced capabilities in case you want to read further on variables. So things like how to put a variable into an HTML form, how to use variable in a designer effects. I put you a little bit information on designer in here, but that might be a separate setting. And I added a capability in here on how and where to set up a few important elements within WebFocus on variables. So we're going to very quickly touch those. So basic variable settings are the prompting parameters. So there you got the prompting capability to turn on and off prompting and set up prompt templates. So whenever you want to define something about auto prompting, it's here. Another critical information is persistent amper variables. Remember, we had those amper variables. Amper variables, the main difference between amper and amper is that amper variables are staying persistent. So they're going to be active through all the session. So as long as the user is logged into WebFocus, those variables are going to be there. So they're not going to be erased. A simple amper is only going to live within the run of effects. Amper is going to be there persistent. So in here, you can turn it on or off if you want to use amper variables. And again, if you want to use a persistent just for a variable in the master file, like my username, you can make that one persistent in the master file as well. So again, that influences if a variable is prompted or not. You should be aware that those settings exist. And again, last thing I want to touch very shortly is the variable in HTML because I got a question on that specific functionality recently. So variables can also live in HTML code, just a little different syntax. So I'm reading variables in here. And instead of using amper variable, you can use IBI amp dot name of the variable semicolon to populate it. So what does it do? In here, I'm putting it into a JavaScript. I'm putting variables in a table. So which means if I run that report, I see the content of those variables visible in my HTML form, but they're also part of my JavaScript. So you can easily use variables across techniques in here. It's just a slightly different syntax. So it's not ampersand and the name of the variable. It's a slightly different syntax if you want to deal with variables that way. Before we jump into Q&A, I also encourage you to raise questions in the community. So there's a quite active community about WebFocus. So if you want to meet me there, feel free to meet me there. And if you raise a question, just add my name to the question, and I might be able to pick up and help on those questions. So a lot of active people in there, also me. So if you want to get to some questions there, let me know. And actually, that's it for now. So I think I'm going to open up the panel for questions and answers.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Patrick. You do have some questions waiting in the Q&A. If you want to open that up, they are from Reed. So there's several here, I guess, as you were presenting. So if we want to go ahead and address these. And then if anyone else has any additional questions, we really encourage you guys, raise your hand. I can take you off of mute. Or if you're going to be shy today, which is perfectly okay, if you'd like to submit them through the Q&A, we can do it that way as well. So Patrick, in the Q&A, Reed has asked several, how come decompression equals 6 only displayed 3 decimal places?
Oh, Patrick, I'm mute.
Oh, you're on mute.
I'm going to mute. Yeah, that's the maximum. So let's say we're going to go for more digits, like we're going to go for 10,000 in here, and we run it again. Now you got 4 digits. It's the maximum of 6. If there are no 6 digits valid, there are not going to be any 6 digits. So, but good question. DM precision is the maximum precision, not the precision.
Let's see. The next one he had was, can prompt variables be triggered during runtime? For example, creating a hold file first and then declare a prompt variable based on it. Since set is dialog manager command, I'm wondering if there's an alternative, so it's ran in code order.
If you want to do, I wouldn't do it in auto prompting. So if you want to do even more complex logic for prompting and parameters, Designer is your friend here. So if you go to Designer and you create a visualization here, or you assemble a visualization actually, and I can use, let's use a very simple one, a blank page, and I'm gonna get my prompting added in here. Besides the auto prompting, you got a lot of new capability in here. So adding my variables in here, I can do the chaining here as well. So if I don't want to do chaining and prompting, I can do the chaining in here. And I can also, for example, let's say I can select something like let's take my country field here. And in here, I can change the processing from the prompting. So in here, I can set up the binding. So if I change the binding in here, I can in here take whatever is defined in the auto prompt. In here, I can also use static and add a list of static values. And I can go for dynamic. Dynamic means I can read from a field in the database, but I can also create effects that populates that box. So you can put whatever logic you want to into that fax that then populates that list with whatever logic you have. So you can have a 10-step logic doing 5 hold files, joining them, doing calculations, filtering, whatever, and just take the output of that fax to populate the box. So I would rather do that one really via that way than trying to put it into the auto prompt.
All right, hope that answered that for you, Reed. Okay, okay, hold on, sorry. He also submitted something in the chat. But what if the source is a hold file? Are you suggesting I create a hold file via a separate FEX and then reference the FEX in this dynamic option?
Yeah. You can create a hold file and then run through that hold file. If you created the hold file, for example, if you create a hold file, you can put the hold file into FOC cache. So that hold file is going to be available in your session, so you can reuse it. But if you want to discuss that a little bit deeper, just open a community posting, raise that question here, and I'm gonna promise you to get you a more detailed answer there. Just tag me, just add my name there, and I'm gonna pick it up from there and get you a little more structured answer than I can get you now in a few minutes.
Okay, great. Was there anything presented today not available on WebFOCUS version 9.2.1?
Actually, maybe what I'm just showing, which is that from procedure thing. I think that one was introduced somewhere in 9.3-ish. I'm not 100% sure. That might be something for Angie, not sure when Designer got that new capability, but that might be the only thing.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember as well. I think because we've done a ton of updates in Designer over the 9X series. I think this from procedure came in 9.1. if I remember right.
Yeah, I got a gut feeling it might be there in the only but that's the only thing I'm not sure about. All the rest I showed you is available for ages. And I just realized that many people don't never found it, so that was why I was doing the session today, where I picked all my lessons learned from the future, from my past. So whatever I showed you today were things I stumbled into for a very specific requirement, and using sharing my best practices with you today. But besides that designer thing, most of that is going to work with any 8 version as well. Not that we want you to use 8, but
We want everyone to be using 9.3 ideally,
yeah.
or at least that's my preference.
Yeah, especially designer, that prompting capabilities in the 9.3x versions are very good, because that was a nightmare in early versions of, or nightmare, but it was very complicated in early versions of designer to get prompting done. With 9.3, it's so easy and so comfortable to build those things, because even what populates that list, you can drag and drop the facts that populates that list in designer and just assign it in here. So it's a few minute task even for unexperienced people to build effects that populates a box.
Right. Reed had some additional questions, Patrick. If he
Yeah.
is remembering correctly, sometimes eval isn't necessary create a variable based on another. What determines its requirement?
It might work. My best practice is use it most of the time, because if you use it most of the time, you're not going to forget when you really need it. But let me show you what the big challenge was in that eval was my friend thing. So the big precare here was I was putting that variable into that single tick marks here. So that is referring to, so whatever is between the both is considered a text by WebFOCUS. So, and that's one of the specific reasons where it's always going to break. So whenever you're dealing with text, like you say, you're concatenating text and things like that. So whenever you have a variable that deals with text, the chance that using a variable within the text is going to mess up your procedure is very high. Whenever it's not a text, the chance is good that you're not going to be in trouble. But if you add eval, you're never wrong.
He said that's what he thought. Thanks for answering. Um, let's see. Okay, and then he has one more. Although I don't think it was mentioned, there used to be a functionality using dot to refer to the current folder when creating a variable targeting a file. Is this still possible?
Sorry, didn't got that one. Maybe.
I think he's looking at the location of the file in the dot reference /test.fax, right?
If you want to find where a fax is located, that is something you can easily get to. You just need the right variable. So if we're going to go for my site WFS magic thing, there's something like that full fax name thing and the full path thing. So let me enable them. So very often I like to use them just for debugging purposes. So if some user complains about a fax not working, it's always helpful to have information like that one somewhere in the source code at least, because then you know which fax that is, because otherwise you might need to debug all your code to find the right fax. So let me save it. Yeah, I saved it. So let's go back to my site WFS Magic. I'm running it from here because otherwise it's showing as ad hoc only. So let me run it in a new window. So if that's what you're referring, those variables allow me to figure out the name of the report as well as the full location and the name if I want to get that information, or just the location so you can get all the information. Just keep in mind those variables are not enabled by default. So if you want to really use them, you have to go to your administration console, go to your custom settings and enable those variables so they're going to be visible. So those are things like the full fax name and the full path. So I listed my favorite ones in here and put my favorite ones into the manual. So in case you want to deal with them, they are quite useful. If that's the question. And by the way, again, I encourage you, visit community. And if you open up something, so if you open up new topic and if you have some follow-up questions specific around our discussion today, so you can go to the WebFOCUS section, create something in here, and if you add my name in here and you want to ask something very specific, there's too many Patricks in here in the meantime.
Boy, there are many Patricks in there. There you are.
If you want me to look into, add just my name in here if it's related to our variable discussion from today, and I'm going to pick it up from here. So again, my offering to follow up. Again, I'm going to share my slide deck with you, and I'm going to share my change management package with you. So you're going to have all the code I built today. So you just can simply copy and paste whatever you like and reuse it for your purpose. And if you come up with great ideas on variables, feel free to post ideas into community as well, so other users can benefit from your ideas. Any other question? If not, I have one little final thing. So it's something I learned from Peggy. So Peggy, if you're on the call, thank you. So I was mentioning that I prefer to put variables into the universal profile and not into the editor as prof, user profile, group profiles. One of the reasons is profiles in the past worked very good in working or dealing with variables, but by default, current versions of WebFOCUS profiles are not the best place to put variables. So use universal profile. If you really have to put variables in your PRF profiles, like the server profile, user profiles, or group profiles, there are two settings that need to be enabled to make sure that variables set on the client are available in profile of the reporting server. So I added then one to the script as well. So whenever you want to deal with variables in profiles, remember that slide in here.
Patrick, you do have one more question here.
Yeah.
Are variables enabled via custom settings available for use in, I'm going to probably say this wrong, EDA-SPROF on the reporting server, or are they set too late to be used there? And apologies if I butchered that.
That comes back to the same discussion. So if you want to put those variables into the EDA-SPROF by default, that's not going to work unless you take in consideration those settings in here. So whenever you want to put a variable from the client, from the site profile, and use it in EDA-SPROF, you have enabled those two settings in the client and in the server. And actually, let me go in the settings very quickly. So it's, as you see in here, it's in the other settings of the client. So let me go quickly into the other settings of the client. Administration console. Zip, scroll, I'm stupid, there's other. So in here, you have to declare variables that you want to send to the reporting server profile. They have to be declared in here, and you have to enable the setting on the reporting server to accept them. Then you could use them. But again, I try to keep variable things, so to say, out of the profile files. That's why I have the universal profile. I always try to put whatever I want to do into universal profile. Universal profile is executed like EDA-SPROF anytime you run anything. The good thing is point A, universal profile can live in your application folder. So you can use it in change management package. You can get people access to it. You can have your developers work in it. You don't want your developers to change EDA as prof. So universal profile for many reasons is a better way to handle and define variables than putting it into EDA as prof. Or profiles, the only good reason to do it, I know, is whenever you want to deal with your engine statements, meaning the definitions of your database connections. That's the only reason I know where the profiles could be a good reason to use variables and do some dash set things there. But even they can be put into the universal profile. So again, take my advice from best practices. I was having way more issues trying to put something into EDA as prof or the other profiles than using universal profile. It's way more bulletproof. It's way more easier to maintain. It's way more easier to migrate. So if you have variables, universal profile is your go-to place. Don't use the EDA as prof or any of the traditional profiles.
Perfect. Thank you, Patrick. I hope that answered that for you, Dan. Any other questions, guys? We still have a couple of minutes left, and you have your experts here, whether it's questions for Patrick and the content he just showed, and also, as he mentioned, you can pick back up with this in community with him, or while Dan is here, Angie, Joanne, if you have just general IBI questions, don't be shy. We will happily take those now. Someone missed the piece on how to find fexes in their directories quickly.
Depends on what you search. Of course, if you know the name, you can search for it. If you want to see where it's stored in the fex code as a variable, that again is the site WFS magic thing. So if we go over here, you're going to find your... Come on. That's one of those variables that you have in here. So those variables are your friend whenever you want to get some internal information. So that's the full location of the file somewhere in the repository. So for debugging, I like to put that type emper ebemma full path in my code, even if you have multiple files. That's usually very useful because then you're going to know which one fails. I even sometimes during my development time, I even put that information into the footing or into the heading of the report. So it's visible on the screen, because if I'm doing my run testing, I'm going to know where those elements really reside. So if I take whatever I have, I can put that one wherever I have. It's not limited to the source code only. So we can go quickly in here. So don't take them for debugging and source code only. They can be very useful in Designer as well. So if we're gonna go for, let me go for EBSump. So let's get nostalgic and go for good old car. So I can go to country and seats, and there's the heading. By the way, there's variables. In here, you're going to see a few defined variables, but of course, you can also go to the heading of a report and add something like, oops. One more time, sorry. Come on. I forgot my emperor. Of course, you could do your eval if you want to. Save that thing. Yeah, I can override it. And if somebody knows where I put it, it's always a good idea to remember it's in my workspace, my content. Okay, so you see the first challenge to find your element, but if you have it in here, so in here, you know my workspace, my content, There's visualization one somewhere in here. There we go. Now I know just by running that fax where it is. So nice for your building phase of your reports, because if you build complex dashboards and things like that, you're going to be able to figure out what facts you're looking at in case you want to check your code. Again, shouldn't maybe put it into your standard report. Even I know customers that have it somewhere in the footing of long tables, just as a hint. So if somebody comes with the printed out report and complains about the result, I'm going to know where that fax is.
Thank you, Patrick. Okay, guys, we are at the top of the hour, so I want to be respectful of your time. If there are no additional questions for our expert panel, we will go ahead and wrap up. Monisha, thank you for the comment. She said this has been great. We hope that you guys got a lot of value out of today's content with our expert, and after the meeting concludes, the evaluation form will pop up. If you wouldn't mind filling that out for us, there will be a section in there to ask for what you guys would like to see on future expert hours. So we'd love to get your feedback from that and how we're doing with these. Patrick, thank you so much for being our expert today and the material that you have provided. Dan, Joanne, Angie, as always, a pleasure. Thank you guys for being here with the customers today. And with that, I will let everyone go. Team, if you guys have any last minute words.
See you in community.
Yep, on the community.
Okay, perfect. Well, thank you guys. I will send a copy of the recording and Patrick's material to you guys shortly. So thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful rest of your day.